My name is Tanel Tang. I am Estonian diplomat working on internet governance and internet freedom issues. I was in the team of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs when Estonia joined the Freedom Online Coalition in The Hague 2011, and currently I work in the Estonian permanent representation to the Council of Europe. And this panel discussion is going to be a guide to the human rights of internet users. And perhaps I should say at the beginning as well that Council of Europe is an organization of 47 member states. Sometimes we are confused with the European Union, which has 24 member states, and Council of Europe is a very interesting organization, 28, sorry, still living in the last year. Council of Europe is an interesting organization because it brings together countries from the Western Europe and also from Eastern Europe. So, for example, when we talk about freedom of expression, freedom of press, we have top 8 countries on the world ranking, but then we have also some countries which are after the places of 150 and 160. And we have a very rich panel, as you can see. We have 7 participants, good gender balance, I hope interesting interventions. I will introduce the panelists to you. I think I will start from here, from my right-hand side. Veronika Cretu comes from Moldova. She's been working on internet governance issues since 2005, and she's the president of the Open Society Institute in Moldova. Then we have Maja Rakovic. Maja Rakovic comes from Serbia. She's the chair of the steering committee of Information Society and Media of the Council of Europe, and she has been working on those issues also for some time. Katrin Nyman-Metcalf is the professor of Tallinn University of Law, and she has also experience in the Estonian e-Governance Academy. Jan Gleissen is the director of Freedom of Expression, Internet Governance, Information Society, Cybercrime of the Council of Europe. Then we have Temitope Adekola, who comes from Nigeria, representing Paradigm Initiative, which is a Nigerian NGO working on freedom of expression and internet governance issues. Then we have Johan Hallenborg from Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Deputy Head of Legal Department. And last but not least, Bill Ekikson from Google Europe's office, Head of Freedom of Expression. I think that first I would like to give the floor to Jan Gleissen, who will make an introduction to this document, Human Rights Guide of Internet Users, and then we will proceed with the discussion from there. Jan, you have a floor. I will give you the microphone.
Okay, I hope this works. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session. Thank you very much, Tanel, for the introduction. A few words to introduce our guide on the human rights of internet users. Perhaps a preliminary question, which will make it hopefully clear why this guide is there, is could those of you please raise their hands who have read the terms and conditions of the internet services that you're daily using on a daily basis? Okay. So we have, well, you're the proverbial exception to the rule. I think this is, of course, not a very surprising outcome, because whenever one puts this question, this is very much the answer one gets. It is clear that the terms and conditions that we are faced with when using internet services is first of all far too long, and then secondly put in legal terms that most users, so the overwhelming majority of users, would not really grasp. The fact, therefore, is that most of us, as a Swedish youth participant put it at the Eurodig in Stockholm, that one just clicks yes and hopes for the best. Because if you click no, of course, you don't have any access to the service. Hence the idea that it arose that it would be important to inform users more of their rights. Why? Because at the Council of Europe we strongly believe, and this has been upheld by the European Court of Human Rights, that the rights that exist in the real world, the tangible world, as it was mentioned yesterday at the Google Tend event, that these also apply online. They apply online as well as offline, but very few people know about it. Hence the idea was born to come up with something that would be couched in a language people would understand, that the users would understand. That, I can tell you, was a big challenge for the Council of Europe, because that is not something we are particularly used to either, because most of our treaties are based on very, of course, on legal language. And to translate this into user-friendly language was a bit of a challenge. It'll be very interesting to hear your reactions, of course, afterwards, whether we managed to do so, or at least managed to make some progress, because the idea was that the guide should be very, very accessible. The guide further is meant to, of course, is meant for users, as the title indicates. It's also very much meant for governments and policymakers to help them in their internet governance discussions to bear in mind, and they can easily check whether what is being proposed actually is in line with basic rights of internet users. Thirdly, we hope that, of course, private companies, industry, will use these guides also in their policy deliberations, and we hope that they will also help us to inform users of these rights. We very much need them, and we finally also hope that this guide will be a further catalysts. I know there are many catalysts already. We just said Net Mondial, there's lots of events, but that also this guide will be a catalyst, will be an element in national discussion on what internet rights should be, and what the rights of users should be. Then perhaps to take you through the guide in a moment, in a few moments. The first element, obviously, is the access to internet, which you find in the guide. It was said very clearly yesterday, again, at the conference and at the side event afterwards. Access, of course, an absolute precondition. Here in Estonia, the access to internet is a human right and has been so already since 2000, since the year 2000. But of course, there are many countries where this is not the case. And the previous panelist who just walked out, Frank LaRue, of course, has made it very clearly and stated that the ensuring the universal access should be a priority for all states. Then the guide is very much about freedom of expression and information. And I already mentioned the Court of Human Rights. In interpreting Article 10, which deals with freedom of expression, the court has stated, and now I quote, that the internet has now become one of the principal means by which individuals exercise their right to freedom of expression and information, providing, as it does, essential tools for participation in activities and discussions concerning political issues and issues of general interests. And therefore, of course, Article 10 is a key issue. It can be interfered with. Many of the interferences are possible with many of the rights that are set out in the guide and which are based on the European Convention on Human Rights and other treaties of the Council of Europe, but they have to meet very strict requirements, and I'll come back to this in a moment. The right to privacy, also extremely important. The revelations on surveillance that were made by Mr. Snowden last summer have made it clear that privacy remains a very, very big issue. A lot of debate has arisen on these revelations. The important thing will no doubt be to restore trust in government and in government proceedings. And again, the guide indicates the rights that exist, at least in Europe, to users when they feel that this has been interfered with. In order to take too much time, just a few words a few final words on children and young people. We have a number of texts in the Council of Europe that deal with the internet. Many of them stress the fact that the rights of vulnerable people need special protection. We feel highly important that children and other vulnerable people are properly informed of their rights, and that education takes into account not only the fantastic advantages that exist on the internet, but also ensures protection of children on the internet. There are a number of efforts being made in Europe already. I myself happen to speak and read German, and living in Strasbourg on the German border, I must say I'm very impressed by a German television ad which points out children in various circumstances with a computer, and the worst being where someone is trying to set up a meeting, someone who's obviously an adult, but the child doesn't realize this. So it's a classical case of grooming. The end message of that commercial is look at what your children are doing, and I think that is also something that we are very much trying to promote. Finally, then, as I said, I would mention the conditions under which restrictions can be made, and it's very important, I think, that users know this. Restrictions must always have a legitimate aim. They must be prescribed by law. They must be necessary in a democratic society, which implies in the case law of the court that they be proportionate. There must be remedies when the rights are interfered with, and there must be guarantees against abuse. We hope that we have managed to bring all these elements together in something that users can understand, and I look very much forward to the reactions here and of course the comments of my co-panelists. In order for this to work, people will have to know about it. The Council of Europe website, we have a special website now dedicated to the guide. There is also a possibility with the hashtag to comment on the guide. The steering committee, which Maja Rakovic chairs, has been given a mandate to keep updating the guide in the light of developments and comments, and we very much hope that it will be, that it is and will remain a living instrument. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan. Yes, perhaps picking up what you said, I'm just reading from here the Twitter tag for this guide. Perhaps if you are tweeting from here, you can add this to the Freedom Online Coalition tag. This is hashtag COE Internet Rights, all written together. Is it correct? So I repeat, hashtag COE Internet Rights. And Loretta, you want to add something? Well, we come back to the website. Website is on the leaflet. You can get them in the backside of the room. I think that I will pick up something, Jan, what you said, but did not fully reflect This guide, like you said, is based on the European Convention of Human Rights. And it is very important to add that it does not create any additional new law. So the main aim of this document is indeed to explain to users what kind of rights they have. And rights in all the 47 Council of Europe member states, because Council of Europe member states have all taken binding commitments with the European Convention of Human Rights. But I think that now I will give the floor to Johan. Johan was working in this drafting group. This drafting group consisted the 13 members. It had government representatives and non-governmental organizations representatives and also academia representatives. So maybe Johan, you can perhaps elaborate a little bit more on three most contentious and most debated issues during the discussions of the guide.
I'll see what I can do. Thank you for having me on this panel. Let me start by just a few reflections generally on this work from our perspective. Working with internet freedom issues is a priority issue for Sweden. And we believe that the Council of Europe has done a lot of important work in this field over a number of years. And it's probably the international organizations who has done most analysis of how human rights actually apply in an online environment. And we've supported this work for a number of years, and we think it can inspire a lot of other work in other forums, be it international formal ones or informal ones. So it helps us to understand how human rights actually will apply in the online environment in a practical way. So to Sweden, the work that is taking place in the Council of Europe is of importance, and we support it very much. We think that developing soft law instrument is important. I agree with Tanel. This is not creating new human rights, but it adds to our understanding. It expands our understanding of how the legal rights apply on the internet. The good thing is also that it promotes the work of the court, the European Court of Human Rights. It picks up on the work on the jurisprudence from the court. It gives that some extra meaning, and it frames it in a practical way, which is very good. We, of course, we are quite careful to analyze our policies and the work we do from the court's jurisprudence. And we're happy to see that the court's jurisprudence on internet freedom is expanding. And I think this guide helps us to promote that. The guide is accompanied by an explanatory memorandum. The guide in itself is not very detailed, so it covers a number of general statements, and those are explained then in the memorandum. So this is just a call to all of you to also read the memorandum, because that's where you find some of the arguments we used when we discussed the content. Some of the issues, we had a number of meetings, of course, over the 1.5 years or so, when we developed and drafted the recommendation and the guide. It was very useful to have a mixed group. We were 7 government people there and 6 independent experts. But the group was also open to others that could come and participate as observers and join the discussion. Give input, so it was a very informal discussion, which was very useful. Of course, the independent experts, they provide us with a lot of good knowledge that government people like me don't have. So I think we could say that we relied quite heavily on the input from the independent experts. So that was very, very helpful to have them. Some of the issues that we discussed more in detail was freedom of expression, of course. As Tanel said, the 47 member states with a bit of different legal regimes, of course. Also, not just the legal regimes, but also different legal traditions from the Scandinavian perspective compared to the Southern European one, to the Eastern European ones. There are slightly different traditions when it comes to free expression, not least compared to right to privacy, which was another one that kept us quite busy during the 18 months we discussed the memorandum. The discussions took place, of course, in the context of the Snowden revelations, which gave the discussion extra flavor and extra color, of course. We were quite careful to ground our text and the drafting in the European Convention on Human Rights, of course. But nevertheless, we found the balancing between expression and privacy to be something that we discussed a lot. Access to the internet is not a right in my country, but it is in some other countries in the Council of Europe. So obviously that was one issue that we discussed quite a lot. Some civil society members, some experts would have argued that we should have gone further perhaps in the guide. But we found a solid place in the court's jurisprudence, but also in other reports, such as the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, Frank LaRue, and his reporting. That was another source of inspiration for us, of course. So those were some of the issues that we devoted extra time to discuss during our deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. I think that I will now get one more intervention from the panel, and then I will give an opportunity to also to public to react. I will give the floor to Katrin. Katrin, you are the professor of law, and at the same time you also have a significant experience in the field of e-governance and online human rights. You saw this document first time when I sent you the draft 1 month ago. What is your view? I mean, would this document have added value in this very complex environment we are living today?
Thank you. So exactly, I've not been involved with this document, so my reflections are of a bit of a different nature. I'll keep them very brief. I'll start from just a very general reflection on the issue as such. Yesterday somebody used the expression libertarian optimism. And I tend to say something similar with totally different words, because another area that I work on is the law of outer space. It's what I did my PhD in, etc. And this area, when research on that started in the 1950s, basically when the space age started, people had very romantic notions. Let's leave the shackles of the Earth behind and let's create something entirely new. Deep Cold War period, the only parties active were actually those most warring Cold War partners. And they said, let's do something entirely new. I recognize this sometimes almost word for word in the cyberspace discussion. And I hate to be sort of a spoilsport, but it really does not work. And it's not a room and the place and time here to discuss why, whether it's to do with the philosophy, whether if humans start creating something, it will always look in a certain way, or whether it is just because we're not good enough at being progressive or so. But it is not really a way forward, because we do not want lawless societies, because not only the good guys will use that. So in that sense, I'm pleased with a guide like this one that emphasizes there are rights, and these should be interpreted in a new context. For lawyers, it's nothing new. That's what we do all the time. We take a text which is written in a specific manner and we apply it to a different reality. The problem is only if the reality is too different from that in which it was written. Then it's not easy to do just by interpretation. And that's why a guide like this is important, first of all, to emphasize there are rights. And not so much the rights on paper, maybe everybody realizes they're still there, but as you mentioned also, Jan, the interpretation of them. What is proportional? What is necessary in a democratic society? There's no need to start from scratch, because there is interpretation on that. And the Delphi case, Delphi versus Estonia, for instance, what the court is doing there, again, it's not time really to go into detail whether we agree or to what extent we agree, but what they are saying is we have jurisprudence, we have rules on the balance between freedom of expression and privacy. And we are now applying them in a new context. So I think a guide like this can be very useful for that. But then, it's been said many times that it's easy to write things, or maybe it's not even easy, you explained you had many meetings, but it's relatively easy. But to then actually apply them and make them have an impact, it's something totally different. And I would very much hope that this will have an impact. And there I would also again say I'm not too pessimistic. Having worked, as you said, in many countries, different countries, post-conflict countries, transition countries, etc., you do look at existing documents. There's no need for everybody to start from scratch. We all know now you cannot just take a document and start using it like that. That's not the point, but you have the inspiration, you have that. So I think in that sense it can serve as an important guide. And then my final reflection, it's on another topic that's been up a lot in this discussion, is this multi-stakeholderism, or the importance to involve different parties. And then I'd like to bring to your minds an image. It's a traffic sign. It's popular. It came from the Netherlands, and it's now very popular in Estonia and in many European countries. It's a blue sign. It's a square. It has a picture of a car, a cycle, I think a child with a football, a tree. Do you know what I'm talking about, most of you? It's just, go look for it, otherwise you see many around town in Tallinn, for instance. The idea is this is put up in residential areas, and so it means there are no designated cycle paths, there's no actual kilometrage that you can drive. It means share this area. You're all there together, so pay attention to one another. And when it came, everybody says, never going to work. People don't work, it doesn't function. And I said, it's become very popular, it mainly works. So this is a kind of a symbol, in a way, of a sort of self or co-regulation. And in a way, I would say the guide should be a little bit like that. You know, if you all behave, we can actually make this work. The same again with the traffic sign, is behind the traffic sign stands the police that says, once this doesn't work, we're going to change this. And that's a little bit what you need. Why I like very much in this guide the emphasis on states being responsible also for their private actors. We want companies to take responsibility, but if they don't do that, that doesn't mean that then you're home free, then it means something else happens. And I think in this way, it can be a very important emphasis on these rights that do exist, and an emphasis on the way this should happen, just as in this traffic sign. You know, if you all do what you should, we'll all be fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katrin. I think that now I will give an opportunity perhaps to audience. Don't worry, the other panelists will also get the chance to speak. I see Thomas Hainotsi back there. I will bring the microphone to you. Perhaps you can introduce yourself. I know who you are, but others don't.
Hello, I'm Thomas Hainotsi. Some years ago, have been the Austrian ambassador to the Council of Europe, and now I'm serving for my country in Geneva, and I want really to congratulate you all. I think it's a very important product, and the quality is very good. And I think now it's up to us, everyone, civil society, governments, industry, what we do with it. Because I think the product is too precious that we just leave it there. So my question to you would be, where do we go from now? I could imagine personally that for country-specific purposes, we could break it a little bit down on the practical side, to which authority to turn for remedies, for example. So a practical tool. The question is, who would do that? Is the Council of Europe already in contact with governments, with civil society? Can we expect that it will be widely distributed, two-page paper that also contains this country-specific information? Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. I think that we will take the second question as well. And I think then I will bring in Veronica, because we had agreed before a little bit what each of the panelists would speak, and I think Veronica's intervention goes very much to that direction. But perhaps I will give the floor Here.
Okay. Thank you for this presentation. It is particularly important for me because I served in the PACE, Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe, between 2004 and 2007 as an MP in the main opposition party of Turkey. And at the time, I raised those issues, but couldn't get any attention whatsoever. See, over 8-9 years, we have come a long ways, and the need for such a guide was very obvious. For two reasons. I think we often talk about certain principles of securing, for example, internet user security, their access rights, and etc. Those principles on paper don't mean much. We need some means to enforce them. My proposal have been all along to do that enforcement both bottom-up or educational, like such guides, and top-down, setting up certain norms. So I believe this serves bottom-up education of public about their rights. Of course, then it is up to us to disseminate this as widely as possible. And my number one question is then, are you doing, or what are you doing as a COE to disseminate it as widely as possible, number one. Number two question is, okay, those rights, I read the draft at least. The rights are stated, but if they are violated, what can be done is not explicit. I think European Court of Human Rights is one way to appeal, but are there other things that can be done? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that the way we will proceed now is that I will give the floor to Veronica. And perhaps, Veronica, you can react on what Thomas Heinossi was asking or saying about implementing this at the national level and taking this document further. Perhaps a few words. Thanks. And then we will come back to your question.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for the question. In the first place, I would like to congratulate Council of Europe for this enormous work, and I think indeed the document is really valuable. But it's not enough just to have it like it is. It is very important to start thinking about practical ways to implement it. Our countries, our governments often ratify different conventions and tools and principles, but the matter related to how much of those are being implemented at the country level leaves much space for several questions. So I will briefly refer to a number of things that could be done at the country level, and basically I depart from the situation of Moldova, or from Moldova as an example. I think there are a number of components that have to be looked at, and there has to be a comprehensive approach to the implementation process. One of the first things that need to be done amongst the key stakeholders at the country level is to identify an entity at the national level that would be responsible, at least for the first couple of years, would be responsible for the coordination efforts around the guide implementation. It can be a ministry, it can be a certain ministry, it can be a national IGF platform. There are about 17 countries in Europe that do already have national IGFs, so I think it can be one of those venues where this guidebook can be further taken and then explored. It could be a civil society organization that is active in the field, or it could be a multi-stakeholder advisory group that might be having the role of coordination at the country level. Again, what is very important is to bring all the key stakeholders around the table and really look for the best model for the most appropriate entity. Of course, it's important to promote it, and I think mass media plays a crucial role. Each country that is keen to really take it further should have an online dedicated page with the content being available in the local language. It has to be promoted through the network of active civil society organizations, particularly those active on human rights. It's important to engage the private sector and encourage them to promote the guide and the principles through the work that they do. If you have opened the guidebook and you look at the particular aspects, like, for example, education and literacy, I think it's important that here Ministry of Educations are involved to in order to understand ways these principles that could be embedded in the already existent strategies at the country level, sectorial ones. Children and young people, again, in Moldova, for example, we have the Ministry for Social Protection and some subordinating agencies. It's really relevant to bring this to them and see how they can embed it. Privacy and data protection, we have National Center for Data Protection. Again, it's important to raise awareness amongst these authorities. Effective remedies, I think in Moldova, it would be the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Again, promoting this guidebook and really bringing it to those entities which are really in charge of those particular issues is really relevant. Another component relates to review of the public policy documents. And as has been already mentioned, we don't start from scratch. We look at what is already in place, and we try to see ways to best embed those principles into the already existent strategy documents. Code of Education, Education 2020, in our case we have Digital Moldova 2020. So there are a number of documents that are already there, and it's really worth reviewing them and seeing where it's the best to bring in the guidebook. Monitoring and evaluation is another component, and I think there should be an initial study of what is already in place at each country level, a baseline where you start from, and to have a very clear list of indicators, both performance and impact indicators, so that you really are able to assess at the end of, I don't know, 2 year or 3 year of implementation what has really changed, whether there has been any change in place. Providing recommendations and advice and next steps is another important element. And one of the other components is capacity building. I think in order to ensure sustainability to this document, it's important to think about building the capacity of the public officials, public authorities, and both at the pre-service and in-service. Look at joining efforts with like Academy for Public Administration, university, academia, so that these principles are embedded into the already existent curricula for the public servants. And of course, resource mobilization. Any country would be asking, who is going to, how much the implementation cost, where do we take the money from? So that entity, the multi-stakeholder advisory group, or that national entity that might be in charge of coordinating the efforts, would be the one to think about how to mobilize resources at the country level. I think each country has internal resources, has internal capacities, and it's a matter of how those could be mobilized, so that we really have it applied and implemented and being brought to the users at all levels, national, local, regional, and so on and so forth. So these are the core components that I think are crucial, and maybe for the first year it might be really worth thinking about a national kind of an action plan, if you want, with very specific activities and actions for each of these components, with roles, responsibilities of each and every stakeholder, some deadlines, and take it as a pilot, promote it as a pilot in the first place. These are just a few thoughts.
Yes,
thank you.
Veronica. I think that we will come very shortly back to the question of the gentleman from Turkey. Maybe Jan, you can somehow react on this, because the question was how Council of Europe will promote this guide, and secondly, what will we do when there are in fact violations of those rights? How can people access remedies? How will we guarantee this? Perhaps very quickly, and then I will take the gentleman there in the back, and then we will continue with the panel. Thank you. Yes, we'll take it.
Yes, thank you very much. As I tried to make clear already in the opening statement, it is clear that the value of this guide will be as good as its dissemination. If users are not made aware, the guide will serve very little practical purpose. One of the first things we will try to obtain is to get translation into as many languages as possible, because those of us who work in our in our institution in Strasbourg tend to assume that everyone reads English and French, but of course that is not the case. And if users want to have access, we must make sure that this is available in as many languages as possible. we're very much there appealing to governments, but also to industry to help us disseminate this in various languages. We're working at the moment, and this will also be guided by the chairing committee, by the committee that Maja Rakovic chairs, a communication plan for this guide. As I said, we have a dedicated website, but we very much need civil society, industry to refer to it, to link to it, to make sure that it is better known. But I can just reassure you, and if you were a member of the assembly, you know how the Strasbourg institutions work, to make sure that this guide is really very, very much disseminated. Maya, I don't know whether you want to say something on behalf of the... Yeah?
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Estonian authorities and organizers for inviting CDMSI here to this conference. It is an intergovernmental committee. Members of the CDMSI, Steering Committee on Media Information Society of the Council of Europe, are all member states of the Council of Europe, which is 47 member states. Plus, we very much work on a basis of multi-stakeholder approach. So we do have a lot of observers from Steering Committee. CDMSI is overseeing, under the authority of Committee of Ministers, overseeing the Council of Europe work in the fields of media, information society, and data protection. So our observers also come from these areas, different associations, organizations, and I underline this because I think it was crucial for our work, and it is one of the reasons why our documents look the way they look, and this is one of the results is this human rights guide for internet users. The core aim was that this is simple language document which is intended for everyday ordinary user. So, you know, internet is, and especially internet governance is such a broad area and complex field that even people who work in certain aspects of this field might not be always aware what all their rights are and what the ways for remedies are, and how does it work in practice. So what are we going to work from now on as a follow-up? This is just the first step, and it took us a while because normally it takes a while to come to a document like this, but we do consider it only as a first step, and CDMSI is a standard setting body, but it also introduces and is going to look more and more into implementation aspects of the documents, of its standards in the member states. So as a first step, as a follow-up to this web platform, we will try to collect information about possible authorities, as was suggested, and also about possible redress mechanisms in member states. So for the start, to have a very clear vision for each user which access to the website to see, okay, in their countries, what they can do, who they should address to, and what are the basic means to do it. We would also very much count on support from civil society and private sector, and we'll be trying to work a lot with them in disseminating this guide and in raising public awareness, because we believe it's extremely important. It might sound that, okay, this is obvious. I mean, these are the rights. The rights of the guide are already known. There's nothing new. But it is important that these core basic rights are all the time repeated in general public. It is important for general public to be aware of the rights they have and in order to be able to exercise it in a better way. So for the next meetings, we'll try to compile existing practices. We'll try to look into it, how we can have this also bottom-up approach in when we revise the draft, because it's also important to say that it is an open document. It's not finalized in a way that, okay, this is it and now we have it for a long period of time. No, it is the concept was that it is open, and it is open to any kind of comments and improvement, and we do help lots of input, and one of the reasons why we are here is because this is a multi-stakeholder setting, and we really hope that we will get some new and fresh ideas also for this very beginning. Thank you.
Mr. Berger, I'm sorry, I will have to put you on hold because I want to make sure all the panelists get the chance to speak, because I just had a conversation with organizers and then they want to cut us here because they want to open this for the next meeting. But I think I will continue now with Bill Ekikson and then with Temi Tope, and then I will give a chance. I hope there will be chance. There is another speaker. Yes, I see. Bill, the question to you, could this guide be a document that you could use in implementing your obligations under corporate social responsibility? Could you use this guide? Maybe you can say a few words on that.
Right. I think we'll look at it. Everything I read seems interesting and pertinent. The Council of Europe, I think, as previous participants have said, has done some really interesting, important work on internet freedom. I think that in particular what has interested me and Google has been the work on transparency, because we believe in surveillance, that shining a light on the requests by governments for information on users and for content takedowns is an area that is important, and the Council has taken a lead in that, so that's very good. There are a couple worrying things about the European Court of Human Rights, which is part of the Council, and the ruling on the Delphi ruling, which seems to place undue liability on the internet platform to filter or even censor. And we've worked with NGOs to get that appealed, and hopefully in the end it will be overturned, bluntly. And then I had a question for Jan, specifically. I mean, what would really interest me about the report is, YouTube is banned in Turkey now. How does the report help me there? Get it back online.
I think we'll. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Now, well, the guide indicates that there are remedies. These remedies are being used. I mean, the Court of Human Rights will pronounce on this, and the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg will no doubt pronounce on the ban of YouTube. It will examine it from the right to receive information and to freedom of expression, of course. That is mentioned. Of course, the disadvantage of the Strasbourg Court is that it takes sometimes a couple of years before these decisions are taken. Yes, but in the case of Delphi, I'd like to, yes, but even then, of course, there might still be the case. And in the case of the Delphi versus Estonia, I just wanted to point out that the system provides for an appeal to a Grand Chamber, and that is currently underway. So there is going to be a second ruling of this time of the appeals composition, if you like, the Grand Chamber of the court on Delphi, and we'll see what that brings. So the case is still pending. The judgment is not final.
By the way, we have a lawyer of Delphi here in this room. I will not disclose her, but she's here in this room. And I will give the floor to Temi Tope now. Maybe you can say a few words about how this experience, or how such a paper, how such a model could be relevant in Nigeria or in any other African country. Or can it at all be relevant? Because this is based on the European Convention of Human Rights, and there is no African Convention of Human Rights. There is.
Good morning. My name is Tope. The Guide to Human Rights for Internet Users is very similar to a document that we came up with late last year. I work with a social enterprise, Paradigm Initiative Nigeria, and we had these internet freedom forums across major cities in Nigeria. And the goal was to crowdsource for the draft of an Internet Freedom Charter, an Internet Freedom Declaration for Nigeria. We invited ICT experts, we invited bloggers, we invited civil society organizations working in similar theme areas. We invited lawyers, we invited private organizations, and the government. Of course, the last two were mostly missing from the attendee list. But we had meaningful engagements, and we came up with that draft that is very similar to this, especially in areas of freedoms of expression and association, privacy and data protection, and accountability and transparency on part of government and private organizations. That document has been endorsed by a lot of civil society organizations working in similar theme areas and has now been adopted by the National Human Rights Council of Nigeria as a base document with which they are working on similar theme areas. So yes, there are meeting points, and but I'd like to say that in Nigeria and in most of Africa, a lot of discussion is still about access, about penetration, about affordability, and these are foundations to discussions on internet freedom and transparency and things like that. Nigeria does have, I can comfortably say that in Africa, Nigeria has the highest number of internet users, about 48.8 million people on the internet right now in Nigeria. That translates to about 33% penetration, most of it via mobile phones. And that has given rise to a new class of informed citizens who are engaging with policy making and decisions with government. And I would say that there's been extreme measures, that clamor sometimes has found its way offline, and has translated into protest and things like that. And I would say that the measures that government is taking is mostly extreme. And our work mostly in the area of advocacy in Nigeria is to, make sure that surveillance is resting on a backdrop of laws on data privacy and lawful interception that are fair, that are reasonable. But mostly what we're doing now with our Internet Freedom Declaration and what we'll mostly do with this, is to just consult and have conversations and do capacity building and just create that awareness. We started internet policy training also from last year, and we're taking that from region to region, and we're trying to find regional partners who are working in similar theme areas, who can engage with the public, who can make sure that people know their rights, offline, first of all, and then demand that those rights apply online. So we are still at the very preliminary stages of this engagement, but absolutely there are meeting points, and yeah, it's applicable.
Thank you so much. I have 2 minutes left, or we all have 2 minutes left. I will give very shortly the floor to Mr. Berger there in the back row, and then very shortly to you. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Just to amplify some points, I think that this is excellent, this guidance. I don't think it's a parallel universe from other issues, particularly the references that we've heard to digital literacy. And in fact, this ties up with the whole question of media and information literacy, which is a broader chapeau. And I do think that in terms of institutionalizing in schools, it's very important that you do link this to the whole question of media and information literacy programs in schools. And I draw your attention to a global partnership for media and information literacy, which covers 80 countries that UNESCO is involved in, and particularly a European forum on media and information literacy at the end of May, where I really think this wonderful resource can be injected into this. So it's part of a broader set of competencies, not just a question of rights, but competencies. And you can get it institutionalized in the education system, as one of the suggestions was.
Yes.
Amongst Gary Cole from Taiwan and the other side of the Chinese, I'm very appreciative for the local authority give us a chance to come to talking about the human right. I think we are share the same situation with a big neighbor in Taiwan, but we do the way. What probably you've been mentioned about human right in mainland Chinese, they are no matter religion, no matter Catholic, no matter internet freedom, no matter online, everything they doing some of control. But right now, we already reconsideration with mainland Chinese. We signed 22 agreement with them, and there are 280 flight every week to come to Taiwan. We use the way. For my church, every year, we send 5 preachers to go over there, probably 1,000 preachers to separate for the Christian the things to them. And we do something like the swing in the lake. In the above, it's not things, but under the water, we swallow the water very much. We're doing a lot of things. Thank you for your gift to us. And we think that this way, some of the way we can doing for share for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I do not have that much time for the conclusion. I think we had a good discussion. We had a general introduction to the guide. We had some ideas for the follow-up, for the implementation. You can follow the events and the follow-up on the guide on internet. Like I said, like I pointed out, we have a hashtag in Twitter. And just please continue working together with us, making proposals, and see you perhaps next time in the next conference. Thank you very much.